Morning, everyone. We're going to give it another 30 seconds or so to allow as many of our audience to join as possible this morning, but we will be kicking off very, very shortly. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Morgan Hunt webinar. So we're looking forward to taking a deep dive into productivity, well-being in a hybrid working world. We'll explore how to optimize productivity in a hybrid and remote working environment while ensuring well-being remains a priority. We'll also look at strategies for managing employee well-being, how to boost retention, productivity, and how to enhance individual and team productivity. My name is Claire Canary. I'm a director at Morgan Hunt, and I also lead on HR and well-being within our business. And for those of you not familiar with us, Morgan Hunt is an award-winning national recruitment business with over 150 consultants across London, Birmingham, Manchester, and Glasgow. We were established over 30 years ago, and we provide specialist recruitment services across thousands of organisations in the public and private sector. I'm delighted to be joined this morning by two expert practitioners for this discussion. First, a warm welcome to Louise Goss. Louise is the founder of the Home Worker magazine, which aims to support remote workers and businesses alike by boosting confidence, organisation, and individual productivity. With a background in journalism, Louise is passionate about workplace well-being, communication, and empowering the modern workforce. We're also joined this morning by Tom Davenport, Managing Director of Alvius, which is a technology partner to many of the UK's leading jobs, recruitment, and staffing organisations. Alvius's platforms, including its vendor management and talent pooling systems, help companies and public bodies find, hire, and manage tens of thousands of people annually. Tom has a background in the British Armed Forces, finance, and the charity sector, and he uses those experiences to inform his leadership at Alvius. Before we kick off our conversation, just a quick note on our format this morning. The session will run no later than 10:30 a.m. So I'll aim to leave about 45 minutes for our main conversation. And then I'll aim to leave maybe 10 to 15 minutes time allowing for your questions. However, please post your questions in the chat on YouTube at any point. We will see all your questions, and time allowing, we'll try and answer as many as possible. But to kick off our conversation this morning, I'd like to ask both of you, Louise, I'll go to you first, and then Tom, if you could give me your thoughts. I'd like to ask you both how you see the workplace evolving in the UK, particularly with all the backdrop of noise around back to the office mandates, and how do you see the future for hybrid working, Louise?
Hi, thanks very much for having me. Really good to be here. Yeah, it's a good question because I think we are seeing all the headlines at the moment about return to office. And I do think that's inevitable to a point because obviously we had COVID and there was this huge shift to everybody working from home or working remotely. So a few years on, it's probably inevitable that we're going to see a bit of a reversal of that trend. But I think you'll be seeing multiple surveys out all about this sort of thing, questioning employers, questioning employees. And generally what you're seeing is that hybrid working is still highly desirable across the board for workers. I think we're seeing figures like, a third of people would quit their job if they were forced to return to the office full time. And also, I think recruiters are seeing a much higher rise in people looking for a new job if their current employer has told them they have to go back to the office full time. So I think we can see that, people have had a taste of more autonomous working, and the sort of the work-life balance and the flexibility that offers. So I think that hybrid has basically become the solution. And is it here to stay? Is there a future for it? Absolutely, I think so. I think it's more a question of how it's managed and how it's going to be executed rather than is it here to stay at all.
Okay, thanks, Louise. What are your thoughts on that, Tom?
Well, I'll try and take an alternative perspective generally, just as sort of, there's the trigger warning, so that we have something of a debate. I should cards on the table. I see a lot of businesses, through our clients, but the business I run, Alvius, we are ourselves hybrid. And I am actually in an office right now, as it happens, in the Morgan Hunt office. And I was in an office yesterday, but I'm often at home as well. So that's the way that we approach things. I would say, generally, I find myself a reluctant pro-hybrider. I mean, I think I have a lot of reservations about it. I think it is the right solution, but with a huge number of caveats. A few broad points I'd make at the top. One is, Louise, you mentioned, everyone worked from home during the pandemic. It is very important to remember, actually, more than half of people remained working at their place of work. The peak we got to was 49%. So still, even at its most extreme, most people went to our office, probably not actually other places, but they went to their place of work.
To a place of work, yeah.
Yeah. So all that's happened actually from the peak of the pandemic to today is we've gone from basically half working from home to like 40% being on, some form of hybrid arrangement. So the headline change, whilst it might feel dramatic for those of us who work in an office, actually hasn't been that big. But I think the big thing that has emerged is this hybrid format. Another point I think it's worth layering on at this stage is employment rates and the power of the employer versus the employee in the market. Claire, Louise, you mentioned that there is no doubt that employees want, in general, in large numbers, to have a hybrid working arrangement. That is unquestionably true, and as you said, there is a huge number of people who have shifted. I think 4 million people have shifted jobs as a result of having wanted, a more flexible working setup. But of course, as unemployment rises, which it is, and as vacancies reduce, which they are, the authority of the employee to demand such things falls. And that is happening right now. So it's very, very important to layer on the macroeconomic situation, which is that the power of the employee generally to dictate the terms was immense 2 years ago, but it is declining significantly.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think there has definitely been a shift. As Tom was saying, a couple of years ago, maybe even sort of 18 months ago, there was still the sort of the ball was still perhaps very much in the employer's court to kind of meet those demands. And now that has shifted a little bit more, and you're starting, as I say, as employment figures decline, then that's obviously changing.
Yeah, and we're certainly seeing that in terms of, the labour market and demand for permanent and temporary employees. It's pretty. It is dropping. So yeah, there is a shift in terms of that power dynamic.
Yeah.
So Louise, talking around, as you say, there's loads of surveys, and I always look at who's commissioned the survey.
Absolutely, very important.
What you find is, the people saying everyone must go back to the office is generally maybe sometimes those property groups that are quite keen to fill their offices out, but then equally those, on the other side of the debate perhaps is a different agenda there. But one I saw recently is an IWG survey that found that 3/4 of employees, and I think everyone would probably agree this is about right, felt healthier, happier, and more productive at home. So why do you feel they're likely to feel that way, Louise? You've been immersed in this world. I think we've all got our lived experience, but what are the key headlines for you?
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I think in essence, what people are finding is they have this lovely balance and that they're getting the balance right. So if you look at some of the key ingredients for feeling happier, feeling healthier, and therefore being more productive, because obviously there is a lot of that is interlinked as well. See, social connection comes into play. But as does, sleeping well and eating well and getting the right nutrition and getting enough exercise and obviously sort of having lower stress levels. And I think when people have the ability to work from home, you then have people not doing stressful commutes. They're able to feel like they're giving more to their family, and you're having that side of things is those needs are being met. You've got people are going out for exercise when they might have been commuting. They're taking screen breaks and going out for a walk or going into the garden, and they're able to do home cooked meals rather than perhaps grabbing something from a vending machine. Or it's small things often and sort of little daily habits and rituals that they might adopt. Then they have the ability to do a lot more focused work. Often we're seeing that people who, it all very much depends on the nature of the job, I have to say, but if you've got a sort of a role where you're perhaps needing to do a bit more of strategic planning, people can then do that without the distraction of colleagues and interruptions in the office and in the workplace. And then conversely, if you do have a few days in the office as well, then you have those social interactions, you have the ability to collaborate and work together, and get that slightly more sense of camaraderie and team and that sort of thing, which is really important for overall well-being. So I think when you have this mix, you're ensuring that you're getting a much more sort of well-rounded experience, and that's going to make you happier, healthier, more productive.
Yeah. Although I don't think it's wholly that, because I find sometimes when I'm sitting at home, I am more inclined to be staring at the screen and sitting in my seat for longer because I'm doing that. So actually, I find being in the office, I'm up and around and talk. So, but it's always
it's such a absolutely. And I think the whole working from home thing comes with its challenges. I'm not denying that at all. But I do think as people get used to it, and they, it's a lot of self-awareness and it's a lot of self-discipline that's actually required if you're working from home. So this isn't sort of a silver bullet, like, oh, instantly life's going to be magical. You have to develop these sort of routines. You have to put things in place that will help you. But again, and if we're sort of thinking about surveys and things, I think it was about a year ago that one came out showing that generally the people who do work from home tend to do more exercise than those people who are in the office full time. So, I mean, again, some of these figures are out there, and it's very much down to your own personal experience and personal preferences, of course. I think the other big thing to mention is if you've got this balance, if people do have days when they are working from home, you also have the ability to customize your work setup a lot more. So that again can help aid productivity, because you can have the things around you that you need and that you want to do and that you like having. You can set your desk up as you like. You can have the chair that you want. You can all these sorts of little things that can make a difference again to how you feel and perform.
Thank you. Tom, you mentioned you're a reluctant hybrid work, and I think there's research, there's rumblings, and I think an undercurrent among employers that productivity is negatively impacted by hybrid and remote working. So how do you believe we can define productivity in the context of a hybrid work setups compared to, because it was easy in a traditional office environment. You could see people, you could tell whether they're on the phone or they're at their desk. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it's very difficult. I should say, as an employer myself, I think I am definitely part of that undercurrent of skepticism and thought that productivity is often negatively impacted by home working. Not always, and I should need to be careful. I think both Louise and I, sort of everything we say, it's a given that we acknowledge it's not wholly the case, and the other side has So I'll just sort of pile in. But my skepticism comes from a very legitimate and verifiable source, which is myself before I ran a company, when I was an employee. And completely honestly, now this was in the era before, working from home was normal, but working from home back then, I think culturally it was normal, and certainly for me, it meant not working. It meant taking the piss. It meant stretching, your leisure time to the maximum possible extent. It meant moving the mouse such that whatever device was, I worked in a financial services company, whatever device was recording your movement would track that, you were doing that. It meant sending emails at strategic moments, so to give the impression that, you were working. It meant all of this stuff, which I don't think will be unfamiliar to people, watching this. Now, as I say, that was very much in the era when I was junior in the organization, and B, it was before we had developed all sorts of expectations and rules and systems around home working. But I think it would be naive to say that a dose of that does not still exist. You only have to go to Clapham Common on a Friday in the summer at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and just observe what's going on to conclude that it is unlikely that everyone there took a day off work, but they are nonetheless taking days off work. And that's the sort of thing that distresses and concerns employers, especially those that own their own business, especially, or that have a big stake in the outcome and the performance of the business, because it feels pretty personal in those cases. And you see that. I'd be interested in, I don't know what the stats are, but I'd be interested in the data on, businesses that are privately owned versus larger or publicly owned in that respect. So I think it's important that we kind of address that topic and head on acknowledge that there is a chunk of that goes on. With that in mind, Claire, would you mind if I sort of asked, do a brief survey of watching this? And I know that there'll be some kind of a delayed feedback from that. But if I could ask, in the first instance, just to sort of establish the lay of the land, and I assume, Claire, you'll then tell us what the answers are. If people could enter in the comments just a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, for how many days, in fact, sorry, 0 to 5, for how many days you are on average in the office. So if you're always at home, it's 0. If you're always in the office, it's 5. And then, 1 to 4 between. I think it'd be really instructive for us having this conversation to get a sense of what that number is. I'm assuming it's going to be 3 on average, but it'd be really interesting to know what that is. So if people could do that, that'd be very, appreciated. How do we define productivity? Just to very briefly address that. At a very high level, my view is its inputs over outputs. Defining it is incredibly hard, and in a way, the last person you should be asking is the employee, is the worker, because it is not only is that you create a series of bad incentives by asking that question, but also it's just a very, very, very hard question to ask. So in general, I believe it's inputs over outputs. Are people doing the work, doing the hours, doing the time, doing the actions which are expected of them, rather than a sort of business level output? So I know that seems bizarre. We could go into that in a second, but I have my reasons for that. Anyway, there we are. That's my response.
So yeah, Tom, we've got a whole host. We've got about 12 or so far have come through. It's a complete mix. There's a lot of 5s actually in there.
Really?
So, yeah, there's about 5 5s, handful of 3 and 4 days, and then a mix of 3, 2 days, and 1 person with 0 days.
Okay, so that's interesting. So very, very few at that end.
Yeah. So fewer fully remote and more mix. Yeah. On that point, on a Friday, and I'll include it when we send around some information, there is some kind of growing undercurrent there, is like, what on earth is going on with Fridays? I always found them pretty quiet pre-pandemic, but now they feel like tumbleweed sometimes. And I think with the new Thursdays, the new going out night, particularly in London, in the city, and then you can find there might be a bit of a knock on a Friday. So yeah, It's just anecdotal, personal. I have seen some articles around it, and there are some organisations saying, actually, if you're working from home, you can't do a Friday and a Monday because they feel that there's a beginning to creep of a long weekend going in. Sorry, Louise, were you going to add something?
No, but I was thinking exactly the same thing about Fridays has definitely become almost the start of the weekend. And I think obviously there's been a lot of talk as well about 4-day weeks. And, that's a big thing with obviously people maybe just doing the Monday to Thursday and how that's managed as well. People condensing their hours, or people wanting, but Friday is obviously it's the popular day to take off or to not work. And I know even some of the larger organizations, I think is it PwC, have like their summer Fridays, where in the summer months people are allowed to sort of, if they finished all their work, they can leave a bit earlier and go out and enjoy the sunshine. I mean, there's an argument to say that I suppose if people are happier with that and are people more satisfied with their working situation and their, the work policy is like that, then does that lead to more contented, more loyal employees? And, there's that argument as well. But yeah, I agree that there seems to be this creep, and I think we have to be a bit careful with it.
Yeah. I've also seen some interesting research on countries that are more focused. They do shorter working hours, but they're more focused on outputs rather than just being present. And there's some, countries that you can see actually productivity is pretty high, yet they have a shorter working week. Not all, but some. So I'll include that. And again, that's one survey, and that doesn't prove it, but maybe, there's something in that as well. And Louise, in terms of the key fact, because, working from home and even hybrid isn't all positive. I mentioned, sometimes you have to be very self-aware. You find that, you haven't realized you've been sitting there for 2 hours, which you would never do probably at your desk in the office, because someone would come up and maybe, say something, or you'd need to go to a physical face-to-face meeting. So what are the key factors in terms of influencing well-being when working in a hybrid model, and how do they differ for a kind of fully remote or fully office setup? Because it's a balancing act, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a balancing act. And actually the point that you make about sitting for too long is actually one of the key ones, especially if you're working from home a lot, because we don't realize how long we're sitting, and it is generally pretty bad for us. So we do need to make sure we're getting up and moving. So I mean, I think if we're looking at factors that influence the well-being, then so with hybrid, for instance, you've got this, mentioned it before, this the work-life balance, and this flexibility to have the best of both, because you can tailor your schedule a little bit more, and that directly can feed into how well you look after your well-being. And I mean, I don't like this word because it always comes up a lot, but like this self-care, but we know that it is important, and obviously that includes things like making sure that you are taking enough screen breaks, that you are getting your exercise in, that you are, hydrating. It's very, again, these sort of like simple things, but they all very much come into play with sort of you've got to be able to self-manage basically and self-lead a little bit when you're working from home, and take responsibility for your own well-being. Because I think that one of the things that I've certainly seen, and again, some of it's anecdotal, but people, they have an employer and suddenly the onus is on the employer for everything. Where is my yoga class? Where is my massage? And, in my lunch hour, and where's all the fresh fruit around? And some people provide that, but I think well-being is a lot more than that. And I think that and it's also a very personal thing as well, because providing a yoga class to somebody in their lunch hour might be brilliant for some people. Some people aren't interested. They don't want that. And that's not, I remember interviewing for the magazine, actually, a clinical psychologist who works very much in the sort of workplace in terms of workplace well-being. And, I love her phrase that, like yoga is not a well-being policy, it's, so there's a lot of things that we need to really think about. Obviously, when you're fully remote, the difference is that you have that autonomy and that schedule flexibility, the ability to customize, as I said, your work environment, which can all influence your well-being positively. I think and fully in the office, it's a lot of things you can do yourself again. Certain very rigid policies, the mandated, you're sitting here because we're forcing you to be here rather than because it's your choice. I think that can lead to perhaps feeling less trusted, can lead to feelings of resentment, and obviously increased travel time, commuting, higher stress levels, that sort of thing. That obviously can negatively influence well-being. But again, when you have hybrid, or even when you're in the office, you do have clearer boundaries as well. So you can switch off perhaps from work a little bit more easily. You're in person, so you can also spot signs of perhaps poor mental health and those sorts of issues as well, which I think is really important to note. That can be harder to navigate when you're fully remote or working from home a lot. So I think, again, there's a real, there are some things that are going to be really positive for your well-being, and there are other things that are perhaps more negatively, influencing well-being, depending on whether you're at home or in the office. And it's navigating both and putting in practices and policies in place that can then mitigate some of those different, the negative effects of either.
Yeah. And Tom, how do employers ensure well-being is maintained, when individuals are coming into the office all the time or into their place of work all the time? I mean, you mentioned actually the vast majority of people it's a job, you've got to deliver it face to face. A lot of our clients, further education colleges, local authorities, they've hundreds of workers and thousands who just cannot do their job remotely. And I'm aware that there's a building inequality even within those organizations. They have to balance, they might have corporate services teams who could work remotely and might want to because they feel, well, I can do it. I'm not delivering, a face-to-face service. And how do you get the balance as an employer?
Well, I'll answer that slightly obliquely, if I may, and that is to say, my general view on well-being and happy workforces and so on is that the focus or the emphasis should not be on where you're working from, fruit bowls, the extreme scenario of yoga, dress codes, etc. That is not what matters. I think fundamentally, it's nice at the edges, but it's not what matters. What matters is having a job that is meaningful, that you are proud to do, that you are proud to tell other people that you do, that when asked, you could describe meaningfully, that you understand why it is important that you do what you do, and why in some way it makes the country, your community, the world slightly better, slightly more efficient, slightly more capable, and why that's good, that you have direction, that you have clarity, that you have purpose, and that you have a sense, if you want it, of progress, that you know why you're going to the office, and that can be a mixture of, or rather going to work, whatever that is, that can be a mixture of personal progression, money, just simply the earning of money for purposes X, Y, Z. I think that general perspective is what really matters. And I think that a lot of companies kind of forget that and deal with the peripheral items. But it's that the really great companies in the world, or the really great organizations, fundamentally their employees are driven and retained by those elements, not by the freebies. Or indeed by where they work, etc. It's that really matters. So my general view is that we would do when thinking about employee well-being, the first conversations should all be around how fundamentally clear the direction is for workforces, how clearly they understand what their role is, clearly they understand that their role is important and how it contributes to the overall picture, etc., rather than thinking about the peripheral details.
Yeah, thank you. Louise, this is something we've certainly had experience of, where remote workers or those that work from home more than others become isolated, lonely, mental health issues. yet they are often, in my experience, have been the most resistant to then return to the office, because it's almost like that muscle memory or something. They're out of sync with actually doing the commute. It all seems too much and too difficult. So how would an employer deal with somebody like that? That they actually genuinely think, look, we need to see you more. You're just becoming cast adrift and isolated. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it's a good question, because obviously by its nature, remote working is isolating. I would say, interestingly though, just from my own personal experience as well, not always, but when I have been in situations in an office, big open plan office, where I have still felt lonely. So I don't think there's necessarily the office is always the solution to that, I have to say. However, I think we know the importance of social interaction, of coming together at times. So to bring people back into the office is, I think, involves a lot of conversations with those people to sort of understand, first of all, what their reluctance is and why it feels perhaps so difficult for them, and to try and, I mean, we're talking about engagement, we're talking about fostering culture. Yes, that can be done remotely, and I can give examples of that, and I can, I've spoken to a lot of people who do it very successfully. But if you feel that somebody needs to come back in, then it's a conversation that needs to happen, and there have to be some check-ins, and there has to be people, you have to be looking after those people, and ensuring that when they do come into the office, that it feels like a safe environment. And I think that's a really key thing when we're looking at, the communication that's taking place, whether that's, if you need open, robust communication, you need people to feel, we talk about psychological safety. Is that in place for these people? Why perhaps do they not feel safe in that environment? Because, and Tom touched on it earlier with this common sense of purpose. And I think that it's really key. It doesn't require an office, but I think you can perhaps try and foster that. If you want to bring people in, and start talking about, their purpose, start talking about what the direction is, and their goals and their aspirations. You've got to have a kind of, I think, when we'll probably touch on leadership and this sort of thing when we're managing remote and hybrid workers, but you've got to have a really good understanding of your team, and you've got to really understand what drives them as well. So, on an individual level. So I think getting people back into the office, it's tricky, but you can obviously, I think there are ways of being encouraging about it, and there are ways of, incentivizing people to come in if they want it. And it's not about the yoga and the coffee and the gym or whatever it might be, but it is about ensuring that they feel safe, that they feel included, that they have a sense of purpose, and that they feel when they do come into the office, there is a good reason to be in the office. I think that part of the problem is that people feel that, there's these sort of mandated days in the office that could be almost a little bit arbitrary. And but are we being quite intentional and focused about why we're coming into the office? Sometimes if you're coming in and all you're literally doing there is sitting there on your computer and not actually talking to very many people, and perhaps even having some Zoom calls, you could have done that from home very easily. So I think this is a big thing to look at as well when it looks at hybrid working, that the reasons for coming in and making sure that it's purposeful and those interactions are purposeful when you do come into the office.
Yeah, thanks, Louise. Tom, Louise touched on leadership there, and I think everyone struggled and kind of scrambled to adapt during COVID. But now, 4 years on, I can never remember, it's lost in time. But how can managers adapt their leadership styles to better support and engage a hybrid workforce, and set clear expectations, kind of without that micromanagement, that over the top constant check-ins if somebody is maybe not in the office? So what's your take on that?
Yes, it's a very good question. And I mean, what Louise just said about knowing your team well and understanding what makes them tick and motivates them and so on, that is, I think that is certainly a big part of it. If I may just very briefly pick up on the point about purpose, I think it's worth being very clear about this. For people to be content in their work and satisfied and to have a sense of purpose, it does not mean that they need to be saving vulnerable children or, doing some wonderful, worthy, charitable exercise. Delivering a really, really good, incredibly boring service for incredibly boring companies is, in my view, as valuable as anything else that you can be doing in terms of contributing to the machinery of the country that makes us all more prosperous, better off, happier, etc. Yeah. So I think that's it's worth elucidating that it does not need to end up with something magical and that you could put on a postcard. It can be something very, very ostensibly mundane, but it still is a cog in the overall machine.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's just really worth being very clear about. But to return to your question, about how managers can sort of oversee team members, I think it is definitely keeping close and understanding how they're ticking, and in a sense, it's like get back to the basics. I mean, if the managers don't know what someone's manager doesn't know what they're doing, if a manager doesn't have a grip on what their team is doing, really, then they're probably not managing them properly. And a good manager will know that some people can be left to their own devices because they are more capable or more trustworthy or more just generally independent and disciplined, and other people can't be, and those people should not be, and the people that should be should be. And that is just the 101 of good, sensible management, as it has been since the beginning of time. And someone speaking a sort of figure in 1850 or 1950 or today would have said the same thing, I think. So I think fundamentally it's that.
Yeah, agree. Louise, what's your thought on that in terms of that micromanagement piece, or
and the surveillance and this? Yeah, but it's interesting actually, because I actually read something about it not that long ago. I think it was like Harvard Business Review or something, and they were talking about the sort of rise in sort of surveillance, or feel like the need to monitor a little bit more. And I think they talked about two different styles of surveillance. There's this sort of observational surveillance, which feels a little bit Big Brother like, where you and I think actually leads to perhaps feeling like you're not particularly trusted, and that you have to be monitored, and it's almost like almost going back to being a child and a parent, like someone watching and making sure, like you were talking about, the keystrokes and the mouse movements and that sort of thing. And I mean, it just feels, particularly I think if you're in perhaps quite a complex role that requires maybe a little bit more, thinking and strategy, where you're not going to necessarily just be like a machine typing away all the time. You're going to have to step away from your computer sometimes. And then there's this interactional kind of monitoring, which is just a lot more collaborative, and it involves the person who's being monitored, so to speak. There's conversations, there's interactions, there's discussions about it. And, that feels like it's done together, and it sort of fosters a bit more of a, again, this open communication, this trust that's so important. And the employee or whoever's being monitored and the employer they're kind of working together on it. So it's, looking at it's feedback, it's having conversation about how they think they're doing versus, what their performance is. And as Tom said, if something's not working, it doesn't matter whether you're in the office or working from home. There's performance management that can be done, and that, I think sometimes we think that if we're working from home, are we immune to that? No, not at all. If someone's not doing their job, you deal with that, don't you? So, but yeah, I think that it's always better to sort of have the involvement of the person being monitored, rather than taking this sort of very Big Brother distant approach that can just actually feel, I think, more stressful for people working.
That intentional management piece.
Yeah.
And just being what you said, Tom, just being a good manager and knowing your people. You'll spot a trend. You don't need to probably see the data around it. You probably get a sense of it if you know.
Trust your gut, yeah.
You've got to understand your team, and as I say, as individuals as well, like what.
Yeah. Thanks, Louise. And Tom, just going back, maybe not on micromanagement, but maybe on that kind of piece around, keeping an eye, surveillance, if you want to call it that. There is a growing trend of employers being concerned about hybrid staff, soft quitting. I mean, I was a bit alarmed. There are whole forums on how to do this and how you can just about do enough without getting sacked, which was,
Right.
and I'm thinking, wow, if these people have time to be going onto chat forums, they're spending a lot of time thinking about this. So I can see why, there's that tension in terms of a lot of the benefits around hybrid and home working are very much focused on the employee well-being, which we don't want to discount and we always want to balance. But equally, the tension is as a if you're in a smaller business or you're running your own business, or as a business leader, always maybe a little bit concerned is everyone as engaged as I need them to be. So what's your opinion on how employers can get that balance right without going way over the top on surveillance?
Well, I mean, anyone who is trying to work out, how they can do the bare minimum without being sacked, they obviously are not someone that you would want in your organization. But equally, anyone who's got to that point, their managers probably need to be sacked, or at least put through some severe performance management process, or just move to a non-managerial role.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, if you have a grip of your team, and a grip sounds quite aggressive, it needn't be, you will know what's going on. And the only caveat to that is if you have too many reports. I mean, no individual should really be managing more than a handful of people. I mean, 5 or 6 at the absolute most. But 3 or 4 is normal. And that's, again, a function of, in any organization that's been created from the Roman army to today, that has always been the case, that we can't manage more than that. But those 3 or 4 people, you should have a real grip on. And everyone should throughout the organization. Have an understanding of why they're at work, and it will vary, and what it is they're doing. So I do think that the answer is not systems. It's not like, we use this amazing chat system which allows us to understand blah blah, or we have a daily check-in and or an hourly check-in, blah blah. All that stuff's good and it's helpful, but you've got it can often be used as a kind of shield or a way of ignoring the fundamental matter, which is individual humans need to be left to work with other individual humans, and they need to, do it in the way that works for them, but they need to do it properly and take it very seriously. And anyone who's allowed their employee to get to that point, or their charge to get to that point, is not doing their job properly. I think there's one important theme which is worth addressing, which underscores a lot of this, which is the idea of getting your work done. Now, if you are a refuse collector working for a local authority, it is possible, absolutely, to get your work done. But my guess is that for no one on this call, possibly 1 or 2, but probably for no one on this call, does the concept of I got my work done actually, if you dig into it, have any meaning or sense whatsoever? Because you have a broad mandate. As Louise inferred, there are such things as more complex jobs where there are job descriptions and so on, but actually the bottom line is to take your broad area of responsibility seriously, to do the blinding the obvious stuff, but also to do the less obvious stuff, and to reach out into areas that your manager or whoever appointed you hadn't really thought of before they appointed you. Right. So the concept of getting your work done, I think, is very, very woolly and extremely dangerous, because as soon as people get into that mindset, and I've seen it lots of times before, but I got my work done, anyone who even utters that sentence probably hasn't understood the nature of their job, and it is sort of totally it kind of set out for them what it is that they're there for, and it's not to do a series of fixed tasks. And that relates very closely to the idea of going into the office, having a few conversations, leaving and thinking, gosh, I could have done that whole thing from home. Well, actually, you couldn't. Actually, those 10 conversations that didn't seem like many, once every couple of hours, once every hour or so. But those 10 short conversations built connections with people in your office, which you wouldn't otherwise have built, and meant that when you spoke to them 2 weeks later, that was a better conversation and you got some information you wouldn't have otherwise got. So, yeah, I'm not saying that individuals shouldn't be trusted to judge their own productivity, but I think there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done to ensure that individual employees understand why it is they're doing their job, why they get paid money at the end of each month, and fundamentally what it is they're there for. And it is not to do generally to do a prescribed series of specific tasks, which when done, they can just say, check box, off we go.
Yeah, kind of goes back to that purpose piece.
Yes,
you really
very much so.
understand it, and because
Very
it
much
kind
so.
of is never ending. If you're
Yes.
if you're into it and you're engaged and you're motivated, then
Exactly.
yeah. Although I do know you can run out of steam as well. You can just hit a wall at the end of the week and just, but
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I do routinely.
we all do. Yeah,
Yeah,
if we're
yeah.
honest. Yeah. I'd like to pick up on kind of that piece around the benefits for productivity in terms of hybrid working. Again, studies, Goldman Sachs, who I know have mandated everyone go back to the office, but even they are saying one of their studies shows that over the past decade, the impact in terms of uplift in productivity is from hybrid working, they reckon, is anything from minus 19% to plus 13%. So that's a massive range. And there's obviously a high end there on the positive side. So but on that, Tom, what are the challenges in terms of collaboration and team cohesion? You touched on it, and I agree with you. I think it's those informal, very short conversations and quick chats you might have that give you that relationship now with that individual members of staff. So when you're working on the project, hopefully it goes better. But anyway, over to you. What are your thoughts on that?
So trying to understand here the ways in which we can ensure that what people when they're working from home are more productive as a result.
Yeah, they're collaborating, so you're getting that productivity lift in terms of collaboration and cohesion, rather than they're just there doing the bare minimum. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Understood. Yeah. I think I'm becoming slightly like a broken record here, but the most important thing is people understanding why it is that they're doing their job. And again, I can speak on this with authority because I now look back at myself in the first 2-3 years of my career, and I can say I did not understand really why I got paid at the end of each month. I thought I did, but I now look back and I think, gosh, what I was being paid to do, what I was there for, was actually not at all what I thought I was there for. And the value I added was not really the areas where I thought I added value. And I think that is very commonly the case. And that is probably because it was not properly explained to me actually what I was there for. And that sounds a bit sort of cryptic and weird, but what I mean is, in that particular instance, to use my own example, I was a consultant. And a lot of what I did was producing slide decks and producing Excel models and all that kind of stuff. And I was charged out on a per hour basis to our clients. And I think I had this sense that I was delivering value that the clients that would benefit directly the clients, giving them advice that they would then be able to take away and run their businesses better with. That's not at all why I was there, and that's not at all the value I was. The value I was adding was that I was a researcher, a support act, a tool for my boss's boss, who was the one who was synthesizing everything that was working its way up to them, and then giving distilled, really high quality, clear advice to the client. And everything that we were doing was just part of that funnel. And a lot of it got lost. A lot of it was deemed not relevant. A lot of it was chucked out. And that's part of the process, because if you want to refine, you've got to have something to refine. You can't just start with the pure sugar. Right? You've got to start with the raw materials. And my job was to produce the raw materials that could then be refined up the tree and distilled into high quality advice by this person with 25, 30 years experience. I was not giving advice myself. I was not doing stuff for the client. I was doing stuff for my boss. Now that's fundamentally different thing. And if that had been explained to me from the outset, I probably would have been a much more effective employee.
Yeah.
And probably much
say,
more engaged. But I wasn't, because of that. So I think that's my answer. That's the theme.
Well, I just wanted to add to that, because obviously what you're talking about, you gave the analogy of the sugar and it's going up. And I think this is the important thing with any style of working, but particularly with remote and hybrid working, is this sort of like this two-way flow of communication. And, these high level conversations about, what is our mission, what is our purpose, are often happening, in the C-suite or with the executives. But is it being funneled down the chain effectively to the people who are out there sort of on the ground, so to speak, delivering what needs to be done? Because if they had a better idea and a broader picture of like what is actually going on, not only would they potentially do their job better, but it would also allow them to go, well, hang on, I've got this skill and this skill, and I know this person, and I can start talking to them, and that would actually help your purpose and your mission overall, and if they're not clear on that, they can't add that extra value that, there's potentially a lot of hidden value there with those sort of people sort of further down the chain. So I think it really does highlight the importance of having these, everything communicated really clearly, really effectively.
And leadership. Probably, Louise.
And leadership obviously is a part of that, because some leaders do not communicate well.
No, I'm just thrilled that, Tom, you've explained what management consultants do now, because I was always we were sure we were all at a loss.
No, we're all in the dark. That's just my current latest guess.
Oh, okay. Well, it's as good as anything. One point I kind of feel, well, I think about a lot, is that difference in terms of the kind of intergeneration difference. So there's a number of ways to look at this, but some research in the States showing that Gen Z workers, or those earlier in their careers, more likely to come into the office, want that interaction, enjoy some of the social side of it as well. Also may well be as a consequence of how they work how they live at home, and they may not have the luxury of having a home office. It might be their bedroom in a shared house or whatever that is. But Tom, from your perspective, how can you build kind of that culture in a hybrid setting if there's really that difference in terms of office attendance across the age groups and the generations? Because I'm aware also that there's a lot of working families who need the flexibility, and mothers returning to the workforce definitely do. And we don't want to be, and that actually is a whole group of individuals who get lost in the whole workforce and possibly lose 10 years of their career when they go out to have children. So that's in itself a loss. So how do we maintain the equality, but also deal with that intergenerational issue? That's
a great example. So someone who's got 20 years of experience and is basically very, very, very good at their job, comes into the office a few days a week and thinks, and they can add a lot of value quite quickly because they know what they're doing. They come in just a few days a week, and they think, to be honest, this is all pretty pointless, and I could do this from home. And you know what I could do with doing this from home, because I've got children running around, who need sorting out. One of them's ill, and there's a builder turning up to sort out the leak in the roof, and blah, 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 right? And this is actually really quite annoying, and I'd much rather do this from home. Meanwhile, you have the 25-year-old next door to them thinking, I'd like to come to the office because my home is, it's a flat somewhere in London or wherever, and it's not that fantastic. And my colleagues go into work and they seem to have drinks in the evening, and it seems to be really fun and cool, and and my friends seem to do that as well. So I'd much rather be in the office, please. And I don't really have a grip on what my company does, and I just want to sort of try and learn from the inside. So that's a sort of extreme, but I think very common scenario, and it is about making it very clear and explaining to the more experienced, more senior individual that just the person next to you, just watching like how you pick up the phone, how you go into a meeting room, what approach you take when you're meeting client A versus client B versus client C, how you organize watching you just a call comes in, picking up the phone, and immediately picking up a pen, noting something down, like just enormous amount is learned from just observing those kind of things in person. Humans are, almost all of us, incredibly intuitive and incredibly perceptive. I always find it amazing how consistent people's views are, having watched the same thing, like having watched the same interaction between two people. Generally, we all come to the same kind of view because we all pick up on the same kind of stuff. We are amazingly observant and perceptive, and this stuff really matters. So I think, again, it's about explaining to that more senior individual, we need you in the office just to be there, just to be interacting with everyone. And it may not seem like you're not running a class, you're not running a teaching session in a very obvious way, or maybe it'd be good if you did, but it's not very obvious. But just simply your presence adds a lot of value to the whole organization.
Yeah. Louise, what are your thoughts on that? It is that informal learning by example that seems to get lost, and I worry for that, because I certainly know how I learned earlier on in my career, and I just still got things today that people said to me that I remember and I do all the time.
And I mean, I remember my early days when I was working in newsrooms and things, and it was invaluable to just be around the other people. And like Tom said, there's the social side of it, which I think is really important, particularly if you are younger or a new recruit and you want to feel part of the team and get to meet them. There's an argument to say that this doesn't all have to happen in the office, because that can happen outside of the office. And in fact, I know fully remote organizations who offer sort of these like virtual one-to-one, and they attend all their meetings, they're almost shadowing virtually. I'm not saying it's better, but it can work. And then what they do is they organize, I don't know, like monthly get-togethers where they do all come in person, and it's that's how they create that and foster that sort of sense of camaraderie and culture and the team. But I do think, and I'm kind of echoing really what Tom said, because when I was thinking about this particular question, it's just a fact that you're going to have a few days where maybe those senior people are in the office to allow those people to come and watch. Because I agree, you learn a lot by osmosis, and it's just watching those small interactions and the little things that you will pick up on that you won't necessarily get if it is all remote. And I'm not saying it can't be done successfully remotely, but I do think, particularly if you're younger or you're new to an organization, you'd like to feel that you kind of knew your team, had met them, and could put those faces to names, and you could also understand a bit more about how things work and what people do and how they work. So again, it's all about relationships, isn't it? And those are formed often better when we're face to face. So I think that, and I say, I'm sort of echoing what Tom said, but it's explaining to people that, can you come in just for 2 days this week? We're going to have somebody there, and they're going to be shadowing, they're going to be watching, they're going to be working side by side, however it might work, because that is going to be their reason to come into the office. And that's what I was saying about people need that purpose and reason to come into the office, as well as allowing them that freedom to have the focused time away from the office as well. And if that's one of those reasons, they can see that it's for the benefit of the organization as a whole, because you are training the next lot of people coming up through the ranks. And I think you just, it doesn't need to be every day 9 to 5. You can, and there might be key occasions and opportunities where you say, I'd really like you to come in for this. We're going to have somebody else coming in and watching. So again, flexibility is still something that can be done within that scenario.
And actually, I think there's a big part in this. There's intergenerational learning that goes on. Just because you've got 20 years experience does not mean you know everything. And I know in our industry, it has changed immeasurably in the last 4 years. And if I'm stayed at home and I am still working in the manner that I did in 2020, I'm going to be left behind. Plus, from a technological perspective, I need to get my head round what is changing, how to interact with our clients and our candidates. So I think it goes both ways.
Absolutely. I mean, the learning doesn't stop, does it? So if you're trying to convince them to come in because they need to support or help a younger or a new recruit, then actually equally you can learn from them too, because they're going to be whizzing around and knowing all the apps and the tech, and can sometimes make their own suggestions too. So I think the learning does go both ways, and that's a really important point to note.
Great. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. Many thanks to everyone who's joined us this morning. I hope that you found it as useful and interesting as I did. And it's possibly a topic that we'll likely return to in the future. But I would like to say a massive thank you to both Louise and to Tom. Really appreciate your expert input this morning and your time today. We will circulate a recording of today's session, as well as contact details for both Tom and Louise. So if you do want to reach out, please do. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.